Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're talking about a forbidden library. We're going to talk about a blessed, energetic child and all about campaign structure and pacing right here on Rise of the GM. Well, Adam, it is good to be back here again today, and we are thick in the midst of like all of that stuff that has to happen just before spring break. I'm sure you're there too, even though this is not the week before spring break. We have what? Not this week and next week, but the following week?
Yeah, it's the following week.
I've lost track. But there's stuff.
Mid-March.
Yeah, it's mid-March. It's the second week of March that our spring break is. Is that the same as yours this week?
Yep, same
and
one.
All of you out there who just work all the time and never get a spring break, sorry about you. No, that's really mean. But I am sorry about you. I'm sorry that you don't get a spring break. I remember when I first I had a job for just a little bit. It was a real job. So for those of you who don't know, I did a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and then I taught at Purdue for 7 years or 8 years, whatever it was. And I had all those breaks and stuff. And then there was a little time in there where I was marketing director for a bank, and it hit me that I only got off like Thanksgiving Day and Christmas. Maybe I got 2 days for Thanksgiving. I can't remember. And then like 2 days for Christmas. And that was it. I didn't get spring break. I didn't get a week for Thanksgiving. I didn't get like all the little, Martin Luther King Jr. Day and whatever. I didn't get all those days, and I didn't have off 3 months in the summer. Well, I don't have off 3 months in the summer now, but that 3 months it's slower. But I didn't have all those breaks, and so it was like I'm like, why would I ever do this? And so I went back to a job that was on a college schedule. So those of you who are like working for the man, I get it. You're working every day, and that's hard to hear people talk about spring break, but we are getting ready for a spring break, and it's busy working up to it, and then we have that time off. Anyway, all that to say, things have been kind of busy here, but we hope you're doing well. We are today going to talk about an encounter. We're going to talk about some campaign structure, thoughts and ideas on pacing and structure for sessions and campaigns, and we're going to talk about an NPC. So let's start with our encounter as we usually do. Adam's going to be doing that for us today. Adam, what's our encounter? And we keep meaning when we do this dungeon influence thing, which we're doing today, I keep meaning to get that picture and put it on here and flash it up, but I forgot. Yeah. So we're not doing that today. But
what is our... You can go to their Instagram. You can scroll through. I will say it's a little out of order when they're not all like exactly in order. So you had to dig for a little bit, but
there's
some good stuff in there. Yep. It's good to dig. I do want to say one thing before I jump into the encounter. We're moving into pretty shortly into a time when it's going to look a little different for the releases of the video and the podcast. We'll have next week will be another live on Thursday.
Just like this one.
The next week, there will be nothing happen that's on YouTube, at least, and on the podcast. And then from that point on, for a handful of weeks, we'll have like pre-recorded talks that we've had, me and Matthew have had, that'll drop like every other week for about over the course of like 7 weeks. So there'll be 3 of those. And then we'll get back to normal schedule about that time. So just so you know, we've said it a few times, but I'm planning on trying to be on to chat during those, even though it's not actually live. So we won't be responding like this to you all like we get to. And I think Matthew mentioned this when we did our pre-record the other day, but we really missed that interaction. So we really love having you all in the chat. One other thing I want to say is I'm considering doing some like live Instagram like talks that are very short, not like an hour and a half like this, but I'd love to hear your feedback on if you'd be more interested in hearing a live talk about something game related, or if you'd rather just have like reels that are kind of pre-recorded too. So feel free to talk into that as we're doing this today. So for the encounter, again, this is Dungeon Influence, and this is Game Hook 196. Real short, but just a hook that you can put in your games. The forbidden knowledge you seek can be found in an old library within a mountain. Each book is guarded by a spectral librarian. Game Hook 196. So we got this ancient library, and all the books have their own kind of guardian on them. What would you do with it?
What would I do with it? Well, I would probably, first of all, I like that it's in a mountain, and there would be like the struggle to get to the mountain and to get into the library because I imagine it's not just completely open. But then the real test comes when they go to try and find the book they're looking for.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I would probably make it so that they had to like find one book in order to find the book that they're actually looking for. And so they would have to deal with at least two spectral librarians. And I would give them different, just personally, this is all totally off the top of my head. I did not get a chance to sit down and think about this as I went, but like I would probably give the two spectral librarians that I chose, or if you really wanted to put them on a little chase, you could have like, look up this title and they find that title and it basically tells them they have to find another title. And maybe it's a riddle they have to solve for what the next title is. And then they go to that one and then maybe it sends them to one more place. And then that would be
That's
enough. Cool. And then that would be the book that they have to get. But they would have to face three spectral, or if you only wanted to do two spectral librarians. And I would give them very different personalities. Think Ebenezer Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Past, Christmas Present, Christmas Future, like in the Muppet one. I don't know. I'm trying to remember back. I don't remember distinct personalities too much in the actual book, except for the Grim Reaper one, but in the Muppet one, there's that like child, like kind of very fey and fairy, and then there's that dude who's like real big, but he keeps getting smaller. It's the Ghost of Christmas Present, and he's like super jolly and like a dwarf, and he's like, oh! At first he's like a giant, but he's laughing and all of this, and then the last one's like doesn't say a word, he just points, the Grim Reaper. I would give him three very different personalities, and not necessarily mirroring those, but maybe one that's trickster, one that's really serious, and one that's like I don't know. I'm just trying to come up with something. I'm trying to think of one like that super jovial, like the Ghost of Christmas Present was. But I would then have those three spectrals, and they would have to have something to appease them to let you take the book, because they're as a librarian, they're not necessarily like a guardian spirit that's going to slay you just for touching the book. That's, at least in my mind, you could make them that because you're the GM. You can do whatever you want. But in my mind, they're like the librarian, and they're like, you can't take that book unless you, and it would be like what's analogous to checking the book out, in this spectral spirits world. And maybe you'd have to like do something to appease them. Maybe that's something you have that you give them, or maybe that's something you have to do in order to get to that book. And so it could even be one of these things where you have to leave the library and come back with something having been done or gotten and proffered to them. So you can make that encounter more than just like, okay, you went in and there's this thing and you fight it and you get a book. Okay, well, maybe it's not a fight at all. Maybe it's you must bring me the heads of 3 cows. Okay, that would be like, how do you go out and kill 3 cows and not have the farmers get mad at you? And that's kind of gruesome. Maybe it's, maybe it's something less gruesome about some task or thing that you have to accomplish. And then you come back with something to show that you accomplished that, something to give that spectral librarian in order to, quote, check the book out. That means get it off the shelf, read it, find out what you need to know. And then you don't get to keep the book, because you'll always have one person in your party who's that like, I love magical things and I love books. I'm putting that in my sack. And you're like, you try to put it in your sack and leave, and the spectral librarian like traps you or pulls that out or does something, if you try to go past the threshold of the door with it.
Right. Yeah.
So I think there could be really cool fun to build up and have in a library where every book has its own spectral library and you have to deal with them. And again, I would make it so you have to at least deal with 2 or 3 and not just one.
Yeah. I like that. This kind of was a side thing that came up with that, but I am a fan, and I wouldn't want to do this all the time. I wouldn't want to be heavy-handed with this because I think it can go too far. But I do like the idea when there are powers in the world that are just too strong for you, kind of thing. And like I think that's okay. Like I think about like Tom Bombadil and the Fellowship of the Ring is just like unaffected by the ring completely. It's like just how this is hilarious and has no effect on me, and I'm not even considering it. Here you go, have it back, kind of thing. Or maybe more modernly, like there is I think about like the Loki series, the time they when they have like the time collar on, they can just like push the button and it like brings them back. It's like you can't do anything because if they hit that button, you're just shot back to where you were, like 10 seconds
Mhm.
before. And things like that. Like I wouldn't want to do that to players all the time, but I think there just are beings in the world that are stronger. I think God should work that way. And I think there could be even seeing that a little bit. You're talking about like, okay, you can't just steal all the books. There are reasons for that. There are things that have been put into play for that. But I like the idea a lot of the kind of running them through multiple people. I love the idea of like the different personalities. I almost wonder about, and this kind of gets into the intelligent item situation, but uh, like if they are able to take a book, they're able to take one book. I'm even like a throwback to your like arch in the dormant mind that you could go and like once a year you could ask one person could ask one question and get the complete truth from it, kind of thing. If it's one of those situations where you have come into this sacred library and what you need, and they were talking in the chat about like you need to have a good reason. The reason is like we have to have this information for this. So you fought your way into the library through traps and other guardians and other people who want the library in the knowledge from this library, and you're able to select after talking through these guardians, I'm going to take this book because we need it. And now you have a spectral guardian who is always popping up because it's connected to the book that you're now carrying around the world,
So
kind of thing.
you take the book and the Spectral Guardian
Yeah.
comes with it. Okay.
Yeah. And they could be super annoying. Or they could be a foil for the party, and or they could be helpful in the mean, in that too. I think
I
that'd be
like
an
the
interesting
annoying
way.
better.
Yeah, I do too. That's the way I would go.
What GM doesn't,
For
right?
sure. Yeah, it's anyway to like needle your people, but I like that idea too of one being like a minimal. I have this issue too when I see a library, and I've seen it with other people too. It's like here are all these books, and I'm just like bag of holding, like throw them all in there, and then you're asking the GM like, all right, what's this book? What's this book? What's this book? And you're having to come up with all these things. I think partially to be maybe more efficient as a creative in those moments. Don't let them take 100 books from the library. And it also makes it more special too. And it's like, this is a very unique piece of information or of a relic that we need, kind of deal. So that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, and I would say that as they try to and take all those books, man, just these spectral, the room
That's where the Guardians,
fills with these guardians and like craziness happening to you, and you don't just take books and run.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's it reminds me of I did a campaign where I had a dream sanctuary, and it was every bottle in this sanctuary held a dream of someone, and they had to go and find a particular dream. But this place was being smashed and burned down by someone.
Yeah, that's right.
And so all these bottles were breaking, and these dreams were just flying everywhere, and it was chaos. And I think some of that chaos it could be recreated here. If somebody tried to take several books, you get chaos.
Yep. So. Wataya Hotel says maybe you can have the book choose the person that needs it, and other books will reject them. So if you're trying to take it, they're rejecting you in the middle of that. That's cool.
And rejecting means you can't even pull the book off the shelf. You're like, It's like, nope.
Yeah, that's cool. I love it.
All right. Well, there you go. Dream Sanctuary. There you go. Forbidden Library. Maybe that's something you can use in your game, and you can get back with us and tell us how you used it, how it went, and what exactly happened. And then we'll have more to use in our campaigns.
Yeah.
So we'd love to hear about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we're kind of moving on into our main topic today, what we're looking at is narrative structure, pacing, and spotlighting within a campaign. And this is another one that was kind of like asked for early on, like really early in the podcast. There was I kind of like threw out a question of like, what are you interested in? And this one popped up for that. And we're kind of to that at this point after kind of going through the world building stuff and, the like looking at how to plan a session and an arc and a whole campaign, and kind of coming back to this and looking at some of these ideas that we've kind of hit on a little bit but haven't quite focused in on. So that's kind of the idea here today, is just to talk about how we have done this, and to just dig a little bit deeper in on these ideas. So um one of the things that I was kind of thinking through this week in terms of this was, um, I wanted to talk about really briefly some idea about like how do we do this even within a session, because I think it can be broadened out into the campaign if we understand maybe a little bit smaller of a situation. And I guess like the first question I have, this is just like a little bit of quick brainstorming back and forth, but when you think of like a session, Matthew, what's like elements that kind of come to mind if we're like maybe just the puzzle pieces of a session, sticking them together to make a whole one?
Obviously, it has some to do with where my players are and what's going on, but
Yeah.
the basic elements of what can happen in a campaign. You've got, okay, sometimes travel. Okay, so they may
Mhm.
be having to go overland or go oversea or
Yep.
walk from one town to another. There can be a travel element that sometimes you will have to put in as a building block. There are obviously battles.
Mhm.
Those are the things that characters look forward to when you say roll initiative, roll those dice, and they go. There are social encounters when there has to be like some talking of some sort happen before a battle or instead of a battle.
Yeah.
And sometimes those social encounters will also include things like skill challenges and skill rolling,
Mhm.
sneaking about, those sorts of things will have to happen. And so when I'm sitting down to plan my session, first of all, I have to decide where are they and what's like the next thing coming. But sometimes it'll have to include how do they get there?
Yeah.
What's the preamble to? Generally, I try to have a battle almost every session. You want to, often I will have more than one battle, but rarely is there going to be a session where we sit down and we talk the entire time, and never do I say roll dice.
Yeah.
And so, in thinking about that, I like to vary it.
Mhm.
And I have kind of infamously, and I'm not the only one, but infamously sat down and started a session with, "Hi guys, roll initiative."
Mhm. Yeah.
Like
Right.
very first thing, and they're like, "What?" And then they're all like super excited, because usually that's not the way I do it. That's like an out of the ordinary sort of thing where it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, maybe I would start it with, "You step into the room, roll initiative," and they may
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
go. Often though, it will be like, "Okay, last time you guys were doing this, and you ended here." And then it's like I'll ask them, "What do you do next?" And I'm kind of ready
Mhm.
with some of those puzzle pieces in order, depending on what they're going to do. And so
Right.
I
Yeah.
think before going on any further, I think that's kind of the question you asked was, what are some of the
Yeah.
elements? And some of those big building blocks are the blocks we're going to have. Now,
Mhm.
what were you going to go to next?
Yeah. No. No. That's great. Yeah. Just like I think thinking through some of those things, I don't think there's an equation by any means, and it's almost the like never let them know what you're going to do next kind of situation where you don't want to get into just a habit of like, okay, combat, social encounter, combat, social encounter, combat. So like that eventually will feel pretty repetitive. Um, but you said the word varied, and I think that's really important with these building blocks and these elements. So, just things like you said these, but social encounters, combat, character to character role playing, I think is an element that kind of fits outside of social encounters. Social encounters for me and those skill challenges feels a little more like NPC to character.
Mhm.
So character to character role playing and like having those opportunities for them to do that. One piece I kind of named here is like even like setting explanation or I think there's probably a better way to say that, but you're coming into a new place and the DM time to say, you crest this hill and before you is this wide open grassland dotted with large boulders, and as you look at that, the sun is coming up and the dew is twinkling on the grass. Like, you don't want to get too crazy, I don't think, because your people might start zoning out, but that's, I like to have those moments too. I think that's an element that can happen. But like broadening out more, you have like your main story or character stories that were uh, bringing in, or side quests, to maybe use that term, travel, like you said, downtime. That's a thing too. And I forget
Right.
about downtime a lot. That's a thing I would like to give space for. And I tend to be, it all gets urgent and it's like, we got to go, we got to go, we got to go. And then I forget about, oh, people may want to like go and learn how to, make something or craft some things. And then kind of two that were just a little more like narrative, but I still feel like are good elements to think on, are like the reveals, and before that, the foreshadowing, where there's like those kind of get brought in, and we can think about how those all gather together and how you can vary those, to make a more interesting game. So I really wanted to think on, those as I was trying to like think about how do I actually do this. Um, and I just want to kick to the chat here for a second as I'm kind of doing that, of just like talking about role playing, zero battles, the combat. Just kind of reading through this. Combat's always best when role play is added in. I do like those like holistic kind of feel to things. A thing that I think maybe is different with me and you a little bit, Matthew, and it's not really intentional. Is I've noticed that I do have a lot of sessions where I'm like, oh shoot, I didn't have them roll anything, and that never is like my intent. That's the thing. I think like my intent is never like, oh yeah, this is going to be like solely role playing. So I'm glad to hear Josh say, some of my favorite are that. Maybe that's been in some of my games. I don't know, but that's not intentional, but it does happen for me, I think, more often. But I do like to get to have action of combat kind of come into that too. So any other elements that you thought of that kind of are part of that?
No, I think we've listed most of the elements.
Mhm.
Again, I might be able to think of something else if I were actually in a game or thinking through a
Yeah.
campaign. But I think
Right.
you've listed a lot of those,
Hmm.
and so it's a matter of as a new GM, and I'm sitting down. I'm like, okay, how do I begin to structure?
Yeah.
I feel like a session in itself is easier for me to like see the structure that has to be. I feel like if I were a new GM, where I would have more trouble is like, okay, I know my campaign is going to end here. It's going to start here. I know a couple big points. How do I pace and structure this whole thing as we go?
Hmm.
But maybe it's one of those things where a session can be a little bit harder for people. It's like, okay, how do I decide what I'm going to do during a session? And so I don't know if you do want to speak into that session thing
Yeah.
first,
Right.
or speak
Right.
more about the campaign as you're talking about these ideas of pacing and structure.
Yeah. Um, I think I think with the just like session by session kind of time, the thing I would say is like to bring in, I'm stealing your word again, but just that intentional about varying the experience, I think is helpful. Because the thing that I feel, I think a lot of times as a player, not a lot of times when it's happened, I guess I should say, or I notice it more as the GM, where I'm like, I feel like I'm losing people, is when things just get slow. And that really can happen in any of those elements. It's not like, oh man, combat is always so
Right.
fast and like, that's where the energy, and part of this is like, okay, what kind of fun drives you, and what kind of hat do you like to wear? I think that those things are gonna affect things, but like combat can get slow. I think we've all been in a slog of a battle, before, or it's like, I've been in situations where I'm like, I like left for some reason and came back and it's still not my turn. Like, what in the world? Yeah, it's those kind of things. But RP, if it's like constant, and had that situation where I've talked about where you all were at this like wedding banquet and everybody was kind of taking turns going through, and I'm like, okay, in the same way, it's almost like initiative. Some of these people who have been waiting for 45 minutes to talk to their person, like that's probably not been that fun for them. So how do I fix that? So I think like worrying, being concerned about the pacing of that is like an important thing to me, where all of those elements we need to like consider. Okay, if combat's like a massive slog right now, what needs to happen? Like, do I need to edit a little bit of, okay, that group of hobgoblins that was about to run in from the other room maybe does not need to make an appearance right now, because it's just going to add more hit points to the mix, or do I need to start making more like cinematic like finishing moves on these people to like make that faster, make the battle end a little quicker. In the same way, like RP, if it's just kind of like hoeing and humming and not really a lot of happening, we can probably more descriptively say like, this is kind of how this conversation went, and move on with that kind of thing. So I think about those things a lot. I don't know if, does that bring anything to mind as you're kind of
Yeah,
considering that too?
I think with any of this, again, remember that your job as the GM is varied. One part is facilitating, and one part is making sure that you have a story in mind to tell. But remember that any of these elements is also part of your storytelling. And
Yeah,
so
right.
when I say any of these elements, it's like you said, combat can become just this drudgery, right? Okay, you roll. Okay, I roll 13d6. It's this. All right, you do this much damage. All right, what do you do? I hit with my sword. All right, roll. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it can become like boring. Your job is to make this, like you said, cinematic, and that can happen in the combat. We have somebody in the chat who just says, "Can you talk more about free time?" I'm trying not to always force something to happen, but allow the players to interact and guide. But then that can get to be these long lengths of silence. Okay, so one thing I like to do, especially about free time, is this comes to structure. I usually don't put my free time in the middle of my encounter, so that we start with something and I'm like, okay, you guys have free time. What do you do? Because they're just like, oh, what do I do? Maybe they've had something in mind. Maybe one of them has had something in mind. The rest are like, I don't know, I go to a tavern and drink, and they just maybe don't know what that's going to look like because they haven't thought about it. What I typically do is I'll have like maybe I'll start with a battle and then have some travel and some talking and social interaction, and then maybe a big battle. And then at the end, I'm like, and you guys are wore out, but you're entering this town. You're going to spend 2 days here. I want you to think about what you're going to do. And I want everyone to tell me what it is you think you're going to plan to do, or in the next day, text me what you're going to do. And then they do that. And then when we come together next time, I'm going to start my session by doing like cinematic spotlight flashes. And again, it's all about keeping the camera moving. You think about camera is basically attention. When you're watching a movie, the camera, wherever the camera points, that's where your attention is. So you're going to point that at camera. You're going to move that attention among the various stories, and give some like cinematic high points of those. So it's like, okay, you said in your text that you wanted to like, go out and work in the field of your friend and help him get this stuff, whatever his crop in. That would be the most boring thing. But you can say, yeah, as you're out there getting the crop in, one day, a donkey falls and breaks its leg, and you're out in the middle of the field. What are you going to do? And then, I don't know. That's like a really weird kind of spot to point the camera. But
I
someone
love it.
else is like, you want to go and find certain kind of dagger to buy. You go to the first shop and the guy you talk to, he doesn't even have it. You go to 3 more shops, but you finally get to a 4th shop and you see hanging in the, behind the guy on the wall, there's the dagger that you've been looking for. But this guy doesn't look like he really likes to deal with people. He doesn't even look like he cares to sell anything.
Right.
You walk into the shop, what happens? And they walk in and they start their talking, and you can be, the gruff guy and give them don't make it too long. And it's all about buying this thing. They said they wanted to find this dagger in their text. And then this other person in their text said, I want to spend some time at the temple. I just need to recenter, and I want to try to talk to somebody from my order and find out what's going on here. And so you give them a quick synopsis of what it's like to come in and spend some days there, and you get that sense of meditation and sitting on the bed. And then as they're sitting there and the peace starts to flow in, the door opens and it's their long lost mentor who steps in and says, I hear you've been asking about so-and-so. And then you drop that conversation in and you let that be quick. But again, it's like, you're going to paint a cinematic picture. What I would do anyway, I'm going to paint a cinematic picture of what each one said. And then this moment of interactivity where I drop it in their lap, give them the chance to kind of what they've been thinking about since last week.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to quickly shift the camera. I'm going to be like, and then you were doing so-and-so. And then you. So in the beginning of my campaign or beginning of my session, then I would hit all those free points if I've given them free time.
Yeah.
But that's a continuation of last week. So at the week I say, what are you going to do? And if they know, they can tell me right away, or they can send me a text saying, this is what I want to do. And then the day after our session. And then I will, in my mind, I'll sit down and jot a little story for how I think each one of those interactions are going to go for everybody. We're going to start the session and I'm going to hit those and then go. So in combat, it's about being, cinematic, and it's about moving the spotlight among the players instead of just spending all your time on one guy, especially if he likes to take a long time. That's where I hurry him. If all he does is just roll and tell me what his role is, I will then lengthen his time, that person's time. Maybe a girl in our group always just rolls and tells me, I hit for, 24 damage, and I'm like, okay, you go to pull back your sword. And when you come to swing, you hit this column instead. He falls back thinking he's about to be hit, and he lands on the ground, and then you swing around. What is it that this looks like as you then come in with your sword? I will lengthen the cinematic process of that. So combat has to be cinematic in places so that it doesn't get the feeling too long. And if it does, like you said, I know this is a time where this has been going on too long. I'll bring this to a close. So combat, free time, travel. I'm not just going to sit there and make them like, walk and walk and walk and walk and walk and walk and walk. We're going to get the high points, the cinematic points. And involved in that could be the campaign. I'm trying to think of what else you said in there, skill challenges, any of those. It's going to be about imagining if this were a movie, what would be exciting?
Right.
And that's what I'm going to point the camera at. So a lot of words there to say that in any of these things, you as the GM, your job is to paint, imagine pictures in their minds. Right. Yeah. And so think about the pictures you would paint. And it's easier to do those with the free time if you've been able to kind of think about that and then start with it. In the combat, think about constantly, like, what does this look like? What does this look like? And how can it be exciting?
Yeah. I really like that. I like the idea of like ending the session with that kind of question of like, what are you doing in your downtime, your free time? Another thing, just like adding into that too, I am actually a pretty like slower processor when I'm asked a question, and I think I've had to like learn how to not be slow, but that's a muscle in a lot of ways that I've like had to work, to like be a little quicker about things and process quicker. And so, when I look at like even like the long links of silence, like one, I think there's times where maybe we're like, oh, we need to be okay with that,
Mhm.
and let people like consider and not feel, I'm in a lot of situations where I'm like leading a discussion, and a thing that people even talk about is like, hey, the 6 second wait, ask a question, and then at least wait 6 seconds before trying to like follow up, or trying to like goad them a little more to answer that, kind of thing. And I think that can work in this situation too. And silence always seems so much longer than it actually is. So just like encouraging, you Taylor, in that of like, uh, those silences may actually be people processing. But if they're like falling asleep or going for their phones or whatever, whatever it is, like, then we know, okay, we need to maybe have a follow-up question kind of thing. But it is a muscle. Yeah, Rob says like give everybody a round to think, like that's right. 6 seconds. The It is a muscle to like work out and to grow in. And that idea of like the creative, I'm going to kind of come up with these ideas in this moment. So you're given that a chance when you do that, for your players to grow in that. I had
The
seen.
other,
Oh, go
oh,
ahead.
I was going to say the other part of that, and this is something I see Adam do well, is you remind people that you're about to come to them. So you can say like,
Yeah.
Torgen's getting ready to like pull this, man cover off and see what's, below that he's going to tear into. And like him, you're going to be next here. So you think about what you might be doing as he's getting ready to pull this off, and he rips it up.
Mm,
Torgen, this great lash comes out, and you begin to fight it, whatever. But
yeah.
like, because he said my name and think about what you're going to be doing next, like where I might just be sitting observing, I start thinking actively, what am I going to do because of this? And so,
Yeah.
kind of calling that or telling that person, all right, we're going to be, Torgen's up next, and then Eliakim and Leonis after him. And then you just kind of keep talking.
Yeah.
That can
Right.
help knock some of that silence out too. But the other part is sometimes work that silence into the story. It's like
Mm,
the statue says, what is it you've come here for? Have you come to try and steal from the sanctuary of dreams? And then closes her lips and stands in silence. And then when there's a
mm,
silence and everybody's just
yeah. Right.
standing there, that feels like part of the story, because you said stands in
Yeah.
silence, and they're all like standing there. And eventually one of them's going to be like, well, we came to do this, but that feels right.
Hmm.
There was this long silence where everybody's like
Yeah. Right.
awkward, and then one starts speaking and you talk into that.
Hmm. Yeah. The Something I was going back real quick to finish that thought. Um I had seen this, and actually we shared it on our Instagram. It was another person talking about gaming and running games, and they had this idea of, instead of doing the recap at the beginning of the session, um, asking people questions based on things that had happened in the last session. So, one of our players, or one of our characters, Ozoff, had a run in with a mimic, and it was like kind of a humbling situation. But like right before that, had a situation where he was like top dog kind of thing. And that was a question I asked about, like, okay, you were in this kind of place where you had command, but you walked away from it, and now you're in the mud fighting this treasure chest that's trying to eat you. How do you feel? Like, how is Ozoff feeling in this moment about like being in the situation? And that was like one question that was asked, but it was trying to like both think about the recap, but also about like what is it moving forward, and what's going on in like the hearts and minds of these players. And that was cool, and I really highly recommend that, for one. But I got to see, I thought like our table, I was really excited about like even just like the growth and like explaining those things from our table, of little by little, as we are giving opportunities, to let people create and tell stories in that way. I don't know, it was just awesome to see everybody really dig into that and like actually jump in. So it really is a muscle, and give people time to learn how to do that too. I think is it's not always super smooth right at the beginning, but as it gets on, the table will get more comfortable to do that. So I really like that. Um, something I've like thought of and about just like pacing and the structure. Something I realized as I've looked back, I kind of went through the recent game I'm running and was just like, what have these looked like? And I don't think this is like the only way to do it by any means, but a thing I've noticed with the kind of rhythm of my game, no matter what elements it is that's being a part of this, there's a sense of like exploration, discovery, and then like an uprooting. And that I think is like a pretty good way to talk about the way I run games. I've realized, and it's why I can never keep somebody just like, we're going to stay in this 10-mile square and really like delve into this, is because of the uprooting part. So exploration, we started in Tifa's Edge. They were part of a thieves guild. They kind of got to know the city a little bit. They were discovering different aspects of it, and kind of once they had gotten to this point of like understanding how the city was functioning, I uprooted them by saying, hey, there's this quest kind of thing that takes you out of the city. Did I think through that line of reasoning? No, I was not thinking through that. But the more and more we see that, they went to another town called Bullens, and they got kind of settled, and they discovered all these different aspects, new NPCs, new places, new locations, new situations that were happening. They understood that, and then they got uprooted into the next place. And I could go on, but I'm realizing that inadvertently, that's kind of the pattern that I have done with this game, even to recently, where it's like, okay, you hit this like floating island of ships, and there was some. It was pretty short, but there was the discovery and an understanding of how this is working and why it's working and the people that are there. And then it was like, okay, time to go again. So I think we can think about that and maybe be. I feel like I want to be even more intentional with like, is that the rhythm that I want to continue? Or will it change? And like, what is that saying about the story even? Matthew, do you see like, if you are thinking about games, do you feel like there's even like a kind of general pattern like that you've noticed for you?
I don't know that this is where the slower processor here. I would have to think through that. I do know that I have my discovery, and what was your second? It was discovery,
Explore, discover, uproot.
explore, discover, uproot. My exploring and discovering a few times has been long, intentionally, because I wanted you guys to feel the weight of the time in this place instead of feeling like snapshot, 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 or quick encounter, quick encounter, quick encounter.
Right.
So when my party went to a place called Vale of Tears, no, what was it in the north?
Frozen Vale of Tears.
Frozen Vale of Tears, right?
Yeah.
They were in this place, and I wanted it to feel like a grind because they couldn't sleep and they couldn't renew their hit points easily because the place was too cold all around. And to like lay down and quit moving, your body would freeze and you would probably die. And so they had to keep going. So that kept them from just like going into a room, shutting the door and sleeping and re-getting everything. And they had to go and go. And it probably felt quite long to them. And that was on purpose. And then the second place was in Occipitus. Oh yeah, and Josh, you said the Frozen Vale of Tears was the first circle of hell. Well, Occipitus was a literal level of hell that they went into, and again, I wanted this to feel like almost a time that they were just ready to get out of because they were stuck in this this place that was so different for a while, and I didn't want it to be a place where they could just like we have a battle and then we go into this little hole and sleep for a day, and then we go have a battle and then we sleep. And, I wanted to wear out some of their resources and for them to feel on the edge and like almost afraid that they didn't have enough to make it through this. And so for those two, it was the pacing was longer in those places. There were other times where that was shorter. Maybe it followed that cycle. Like I said, I haven't really thought through this in my normal session planning. I haven't really thought of that meta, what is exactly happening here.
Yeah, that's cool. I like with both of those. I mean, so for you all in the chat and who listened later who are not part of our game, my character died in the Frozen Vales of Tears, and because of maybe a bad decision, but also the slow grind and like just wearing down of our resources kind of thing. That was a really tough piece of that. But both of those, I think, because the narrative of it was the grind, it really worked. To like there are times when it's like, man, we're still in this place, like, and that's not really supposed to be the narrative thing, but it just feels like that, or it's just taking a while. I do think like those like fit, and that was done really well, where both it was like a slow move through this, but we're feeling it, the whole time. That's the thing, as like our crew is going into the Underdark, I want that, for that feel of like, you know, you have come down, there are tons and tons and tons of earth, and miles of earth above you, and you're feeling this like kind of claustrophobia, kind of thing as you go down through here. That's something I would want for that situation too, is to feel that. So
And
that's a good
probably
word.
if you're in a long grind like that, know that it's not just I'm grinding. So I've been in these dungeon or these modules where it's like a super huge dungeon, and it's just
Mm,
like slog after slog after slog of like meaningless battle, meaningless battle, meaningless battle against low tier or mid tier people just over and over again.
yeah.
And their whole point is we're trying to wear out your resources, and those tend to just like mind numb me, and I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't like this. So even though I said it was kind of a slog to get through, I don't want it to be a mental slog. So I want them
Right.
constantly discovering new
Hmm.
and like inspiring sorts of vistas and items and places,
Yeah.
even though they're in this one area they can't get out of and they can't rest necessarily. So
Right.
I hope that as you were going through the Frozen Vale of Tears, there was enough like constant new things and
Mm,
new areas and a new threat to
yeah.
discover that were of varying levels or
Hmm.
varying, degrees, that you felt like this was like interesting. And the same thing
Right.
with
Yeah.
Occipitus, that level of hell that you guys went through. Uh, it's not just you went over these planes and folds of skin for like ages, and you
Yeah.
just kept fighting different small creatures.
Hmm.
I wanted you to come to this place where there was this remembered temple that would flash back
Right.
and forth between what it was like when it was in heaven and what it was like now that it's been thrown down the hell. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the same thing when you got into the place where that final sacrifice was being made, and
Hmm.
all of this. I
Yeah.
didn't want it to be just like a string of pearl fights. I wanted it to have some flow to it, and so that's kind of this whole pacing idea. And I don't really know how to explain the way I come up with that stuff, except
Mm,
for I think what would be a good story to me.
yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Rob mentioned that in a different way. A good slog should spike character anxiety, not boredom. That's great. Yeah. Yeah. It's really good.
You keep talking. I got to go answer my door. This is what
That's
happens when
good.
you record live. I'll be right back.
No, it's all good. Yeah. So I think some practical pieces, that we talked about as you're thinking through that, of like, what's the purpose of what we're doing? How do these elements fit together with purpose? Um, I, love that idea of, if we're like looking at downtime or travel, even, like, what are the things that matter to the story or matter to the character development? And those can be spotlit, but also, if it's not necessarily fitting in that, to be able to just kind of talk through the narrative of it and explain that, maybe ask some questions, but then kind of move on at a more like higher view of things. So just kind of, Matthew, I was just kind of like reiterating some of the things that we talked about there.
Did you
But
highlight Rob's last comment
yeah,
here?
yeah,
Because
yeah, I think it's great.
I think that's true. And if you already highlighted it, I'm going to do it again
Yeah,
anyway. The slog shouldn't produce boredom. It should produce anxiety. It should
yeah,
heighten like this
right.
sense of foreboding and like anxiety. That's the best way to put it. I could have saved like 10 minutes of talking just saying that right there.
Yep. Yeah, awesome. Cool. Well, again, we're just kind of like scratching the surface and kind of reiterating some things, digging into that. But I think I want to move on to our NPC today.
Okay.
because I do want to try to hit some questions today before we're done too, if possible. So
Yeah. Well, let's hit our NPC. Our NPC
cool.
today is a young, energetic child, right, named Tristan. And so you have this young boy with a huge, warm smile. He has dirt-covered clothing. It's a byproduct of his exuberance, right? Everything he does in life is full of exuberance. He always wants to help. There are so many things that are just so interesting. Oh, what's that over there? He's like constantly being distracted, right? He's distractible, full of energy, perpetually curious. He wants to find adventure and fun, but rarely realizes the danger involved. So the background here. The night that Tristan was born, there was something peculiar in the air around the campsite of the traveling theater group. Passing fairy decided to fly into the window of one of the wagons and gift the newborn Tristan with the ability to understand the ancient and forgotten language of a once powerful race. As Tristan grew, his strange babblings seemed little more than childish play, and no one realized their significance, save a few academics who briefly wondered why the young boy's song sounded oddly familiar. He's the quintessential chosen one, Tristan here, but he hasn't realized or grown into his role yet. Fate decreed that he'd be important to the world in some fashion, and that's caused the PCs to run into him or be led to him in some way. While they need his help, his age is problematic and his curiosity is hard to handle. However, he's lovable, engenders feelings of protection in those around him, perhaps another one of the fairy gifts to him. So you have this child who's been chosen in some way, and this is the beautiful thing as a GM. You get to decide what that is and what his importance to your world is going to be. And he doesn't have to be the central character, and I wouldn't make him the central character. You want your PCs to be central, but he can be a super important cog of what's going on in the world that has to be protected by your PCs. They have to, first of all, recognize his importance. And he's constantly like kind of throwing himself into a place where he could be dangerously hurt. And so your PCs are having to watch out for him. I like this kind of an NPC because it gives you so much freedom to tell epic stories through just the places he leads them. And once they begin to realize that he may know this language that nobody else remembers, and he like has this innate thing that leads him to places, and maybe we need to follow that a little bit. But at the same time, we can't just let him go wherever he wants or he's going to die. And so,
right. Yeah. I was thinking about like, what does like bringing a child NPC into the mix do? You know, like that's a different kind of thing where it's like, oh, we have this like paladin walking, with us who's an NPC who can like hold their own in battle, or this wise mage. But then like you bring in a child or somebody who maybe doesn't have quite as much ability to go, fight the troll. And like, what do you do with that? I think that's like an interesting kind of mix. And I really like NPCs that the party will like care for. Like that's a not just like, oh, we like them, but if this kid is in the mix and like traveling, with your party or something, you're going to need to take care of him, not just let him go frolicking into the dungeon, on his own. And I think, but I like people like that. Like one of my game in my game, there was a oh man, shoot, I forgot the awesome name of it.
the little cat girl, or
she was a little cat girl. Josh is in here. He Curious Spirit. Yeah, Curious Spirit. Thank you, Josh. Curious Spirit. And thankfully Josh's character was like extra like care about that character. But I really like when there's those kind of relationships that are formed. I love Rob's summon Leoman's tiny daycare. My party actually has a thing similar to that they probably would do that with. But I think you did actually.
Daycare, you put an NPC shoving them in the fortress and then locking it.
That's
is that daycare?
It wasn't a kid, but you guys did that to one of the NPCs. So, I like that kind of situation because I tend to either put child NPCs in the game and they're like meant to be for that to like grow affection and protection for, or they're like not really a kid and they're like completely evil, kind of thing. Like that's like my two ways of using like kid characters is that of like, no, this is actually like a devil inside a kid form, and that gets freaky too. But a thing I like about Tristan too is, and it's not always again about like making an encounter, but my thought is this is one of those situations where if the party has an interest in the power or the knowledge or the blessing that has been given to Tristan, there probably are other people in the world who also are interested in those things, and that may cause like issues or situations that he's now put into because of that.
And the beautiful thing is you can use some of those little sing-songy things he makes up that you begin to realize are prophetic verse of this old language. And it's like they begin to unravel some things. So you can drop some lore through this child. As
that's a good idea.
I have used children in a different way. I had a Lord of the Flies type child who had tattoos all over his body and this like weird Mohawk Warriors top knot with he had a big bat with spikes sticking out of it. And he was like kind of making fun of our PCs because of their lack of ability as he led them through orc infested mountains.
I forgot about that kid.
But he was just like this kid who was like super nimble and able to hide. And
you had the kid that was the like undoer also that we all were freaked out about because we didn't know what he could do, but he was threatening us. And that was good times too. Yeah. Like I'm about to get zapped by this kid who can't control his emotions.
So there you go. An NPC, young child who has been blessed by the Fae, by the fairy.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to these Haversack questions.
Yeah, let's jump into Haversack for a little bit.
If we can.
So we have a new Haversack writer, I think, as far as I know. This is Adam Whiteside. Questions for the Haversack. He's got 3 here. Hey, Matthew and Adam, I'm trying to create a world for my players for an upcoming campaign. I really enjoyed your 3-part series on planning campaigns, arcs, and sessions, and it's been extremely helpful. However, the campaign I want to run will likely involve some amount of intrigue and politics, which means I'm going to need a lot of NPCs. I'm not a very confrontational person, and it's hard for me to maintain a straight face or keep a tense atmosphere without cracking a joke to diffuse or deflect some of the stress. I sometimes freeze in the face of pressure as well, which leads to breaks in my persona while I check what my NPC knows and how they might respond. This challenge leads to my 3 questions. 1, how do you keep yourselves in character when voicing an NPC and remember what they know or how they act in the moment? To start with.
So I have some thoughts on that. First of all, as far as keeping in character, I know new GMs sometimes have a hard time remembering, like, what was the character I gave them? I did. I used to have that all the time. I'd kind of start with one character and then I would melt into another character and then move. And it's like, so one thing I generally do when I know I'm going to have a lot of NPCs, I'll just go scouring for lots of pictures, and I find somebody who looks like what I think they're going to look like, and I keep that picture, and then I will also, if I'm going to try and use a voice, and I think I've said this in earlier episodes, I used to have this little digital recorder, but now we all have phones with a voice recorder on them. You can use those as well, and I'll go through and I'll like try to say something like that person would say it. So, and I talked about how I used to drive down the highway, just reading every sign, talking to myself in this voice to try and get comfortable with that. Yeah. So I'm going along and I'm looking and I'm like, oh, there's a Golden Corral over there. I wonder who eats at the Golden Corral anyway. And I'll talk like that and I'll be like, this is going to be that guy. And I'm going to always talk like this for that guy. And so I'll do that into the voice recorder and I'll talk and I'll say, this is some of the stuff I might say if I was this NPC character. Right. And then I'll name it that NPC character. And I'll then, when I'm getting ready to go into a night where that NPC is going to talk, I'll listen to that and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's the way he talks. And I'll have to remember that that's the accent he has and not another one. And So that's how I kind of remember. But as far as like what knowledge do they have, that can be a hard thing. You're going through and you're trying to remember what exactly it is they know and don't know. And I don't think my players have any trouble with this, but say I'm talking like someone and they ask me some question, I'll be like, hold on a second while I check and see if I know that. And I'll look down at my notes and just do it in your voice. Keep your voice going and
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
like you're the whole time. Be like, I think I might know about that. Let me check.
right.
And I'll look and then I'll come back. And
Yeah,
I think they totally love to see that you're staying in the character, even when you're just checking to see what you really know, instead of getting like flummoxed and flustered by this question. And then you're like, oh, hold on. Just
yeah,
keep
yeah,
talking in character while you're looking. And then
yeah.
even if you mess up and say, oh, wait, I said that the spider had 8 friends. Really, the spider is one of 100 of her kind. I just realized, and then you can point that as you're saying, I just realized your
Yeah,
characters know. Your
yeah,
characters know you have a lot of information to keep up there, but just keep in the
yeah,
character because what they want is fun and they want to
yeah.
get an
Right.
idea of what is this personality of this person like, this NPC. And, so when you're Lord Seabury and you're talking and they say, Lord Seabury, are you going to try this person right now and kill him? And you're like, according to the statutes, we have to, yes, we're going to kill him now.
Yeah,
Whatever it is,
yeah,
stay in your character, and they'll be
yeah,
fine with you looking that stuff up.
yeah,
As
yeah.
far as like how you keep that information, I've had so many different methods from, using software to using. I think you said you use a note card, or this is a different question.
Yeah. Second question is kind of
Yeah.
rolling into this. How do you create or record your NPCs? I use an index card with a few snippets and quotes that help define the character, but do you guys have a different method? So we can kind of move into that too.
Yeah, so moving into that, I've done everything from like huge stat blocks, if I think they're going to fight, to if it's just a person, I'll have like note cards with some
Yeah.
stuff. Sometimes I just have like my notebook and I have all these names in them, and I'm like, man, I got to somehow keep these, and I'll take a highlighter and just highlight the names so that I can like look and see where each NPC is. I think that's going to kind of flow. I'm also less organized. I'm that guy who like loves to write game ideas down, but I have like 17 different notebooks I write in, and I'm like, I know I wrote this in one of them, and so I'm not probably the best one. Adam, how do you do this? How do you record and keep your
Yeah.
NPCs and their information straight? Maybe you do a much more organized thing than me, although I have a feeling you don't.
I'm a little of a disorganized person too. Lately though, this, okay. Too many thoughts in my brain at the same time. I really like, and this is a influence from you, Matthew, but I love having the picture and being able to use that to remind me of, okay, this is what this person sounds like as I'm looking at them, what I think they sound like. Um, that's a thing I've used. So if you're, if it's like these are known NPCs, like I know that this NPC is going to cross my people's path, you can do a little more work in that of try to have a picture or at least like jot some ideas down about like, they look like Oscar the Grouch. I don't know, like that kind of thing. I don't know why that came to mind, but that's the one. And you can at least they sound quasi Irish and they are motivated by that. That's a thing I've talked about a lot, but like that motivation idea of that can get me really far if I'm remembering what are they actually motivated by. This shopkeeper is motivated by the fact that they just are trying to take care of their family. Like that is their whole point is trying to make enough money to feed their family, or they're motivated by massive amounts of greed. Those are going to be two very different shopkeep experiences. Um, so like motivation's a huge thing. And
Yeah.
so I will, keep that marked down somewhere. Our group right now is doing like we'll meet for 2 weeks online. So roll 20, or, if you use like Foundry or maybe some other kind of virtual tabletop, if you can have, even like pictures, like handouts, and you can do like a GM notes kind of thing, those can be in there, or it can just be in like a Google Doc or written down on your journal, kind of thing. But the 3x5 card thing I've used to do that. If they're like on the spot NPCs, I tend to make notes in the moment where it's like, you know, yeah, this is the arrow merchant Michael Jorgensen, and like I'm like writing down on my note, Michael Jorgensen, Arrow Fletcher, um, merchant. And then as I start talking, I'm like making notes to just remind myself, because one, I want to put that in my stuff later, because it's like when they come back to Bullens and they're like, we want to talk to Michael Jorgensen. He's got the best arrows in the country. It's like, oh shoot, who's Michael Jorgensen? And I can like flip through and be like, oh yeah, Bullens, Michael Jorgensen. Okay.
Yep.
That happens a lot. And I've been in more positions lately where I've actually had to do things on the fly, just the way different games, not our Thursday game, but doing that. And so I have to make notes and then kind of keep track of that. One thing, what was the commercial where something like really awkward happened, and they're like, I feel like it was a candy bar commercial, and they would like take a bite of the candy bar to give them time to think. Do you know what I'm talking about? This is
I don't watch TV very often.
I can't remember. Maybe somebody in the chat knows that, but this is like old, like within the last probably 10 years ago. But it'd be like the record would skip and they'd be like, and take a bite, and then they'd think during that. I think there's something, like have a glass of water next to you, a cup of coffee, and I use that sometimes where somebody asks me a question and I need a little extra time. I'm like, take a drink as I consider it. And probably everybody's like, oh, he's thinking, but that really does, like, if you need that to do something like that. I like the idea of if it's like a shopkeep, a lot of times I'm like, they're asked like, well, what would this thing cost? And it's like, oh, let me check my ledgers here, and like start flipping through the book, or things to think through that kind of thing. I do think that's a useful tool there. So
yeah, and if you have a lot of NPCs, whether you've made them up before or as you're making them up on the fly, try and come up with like their catchphrase. We recently just watched Free Guy again, and I always laugh when they put dude in and he's like not fully made, and he's like something catchphrase, and he just says the word catchphrase because they hadn't yet finished the code. But I think that's a true thing. So many video game makers do this because it helps you quickly identify a person. If you have an NPC who says, oh yeah, we can get that done skippity flip, skippity flip, that's stupid. But like if you write that down and then like every time your people come into town, you're and you wrote down, we can get that done skippity flip. You'll remember everything about that character just from seeing that line.
Yeah,
and they come in there like, we want to talk to Jorgensen, whatever your name for him, Michael Jorgensen. It's like, oh yeah, we can get that done skippity flip. I know who that guy is. Even if you just write his name and his catchphrase each time for people. And maybe you're like, well, I don't know if I can come up with all those different catchphrases. Well, yeah, that's something different, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Start listening for lots of catchphrases in the world and mimic them.
Yep. Maddie, you got time to finish this one?
Yeah, let's do one.
Also, I want to give a call out. Chris Case in the chat. It's good to see you. Glad you could make it for this one.
And I think Snickers sounds like a great guest, because that was my first thought, even though I don't watch a lot of TV. Snickers just seems like
it's like
kind of
need a minute. That was what it was. It was need a minute, need a moment. Grab a Snickers. I'm pretty sure that was the thing. So
boom.
We'll have to look that up later. All right. The third one, how do you get your players to negotiate with enemy NPCs without forcing them to in some fashion? I've never once managed to get a PC to talk to a villain or just a petty thief without playing the I know something you don't know card, which feels so forced and cheesy. Negotiation with enemy NPCs.
So I'm assuming this means negotiating mean not just come in swords swinging, but like actually talk to your NPC before, so that there can be some of that banter. For me, it's just, again, in character, I just address them straight on. They come in and it's like they start to run at me. Maybe they make their first swing, whether they hit or they miss. I would have them jump back and say, so you're just going to come in swinging? That's all you've got? What are you, some sort of brainless barbarian? Have you and I'll taunt them, and
Yeah, yeah.
talk to them and get them to talk back. Or I'll say, oh, so you want to swing your sword before you even find out that I have and in the name of
Right.
something. I'm just off top, but I think just like, talking to them, maybe calling them out on the fact that all they're doing is fighting.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think about that. Great radio as I sit here. The It is tough. I do think that's tough, especially when if like if it has been established that this is an enemy or a villain, I do think it's hard for you to have much time. But I do like that, taking the moment to monologue a little bit, and you got me monologuing again. Um, uh, I did a thing recently where, and there were other reasons for it, but one of the things was that uh, this rogue avatar that is kind of becoming a threat to the group and to the world, had a negotiation a little bit with the party, but it wasn't really like the actual person. They spoke through a form, kind of thing, and it ended in combat,
It
which I
did.
thought it would, probably, unless everybody changed the course of the game drastically. But that was a way I knew like I could have a time. So I think even like having some situations where, in this case, it was like basically it was a golem that was being like spoken through to talk to them. So even though combat happened, it wasn't like, oh, they just fought the big bad, in full kind of thing. Maybe using distance like that. I was thinking in terms of like using distance to be able to create this and still have the threat of violence. You could use a magic mirror that they speak through, or a crystal ball, or, kind of thing. Like those are ways to have communication that's not going to end necessarily. You can even do, like a sending spell. Um, that maybe the big bad guy is or been scrying on the party and has now sent this picture or sent this message to them, and there's communication that can happen. I can't remember if you can actually communicate back and forth with sending, but um, doing something like that where there's a conversation that happens and threats, uh, or negotiations that can happen from afar, can help. But in person, a lot of times my expectation is that they're going to probably come to blows pretty quickly if the PCs feel like they have a chance. And usually, even if they don't feel like they have a chance, that's going to happen. But like Matthew said, if you're bringing in, if they want to talk, I feel like usually there's at least a pause to like listen to what the enemy has to say for a brief time, at least. That's my thoughts. Kind of to end here. So also, Adam says, also the setting is going to be the sci-fi and gritty world of Eberron. If either of you have any experience with that world or steampunk-esque RPGs like Blades in the Dark, tips would be appreciated. Thanks for all the advice and supporting ascending GMs like me. You guys are great. Adam W. I don't have experience with Eberron, really. Unfortunately, I wish I could speak into that a little bit too. I'd say the only more steampunk related things that I've experienced is the game Upwind, which Matthew and I both have played, where it's kind of in that realm of like flying ships and such. But I don't know, you have any thoughts on that, Matthew?
Yeah, I haven't done anything in Eberron either, and I typically have been either fantasy or sci-fi, but I love the idea of steampunk, and I'll bring steampunk elements into my games. But I don't know that I can necessarily be one to give like any pointers or advice on that,
Yeah.
because I haven't done a lot in that genre.
Yeah. I usually try to, like, whatever it is, just try to take some time to immerse in it. So like when we've done other things, when we played Red Markets, like I got a little more into like just watching and researching like zombie style stories, or whenever I'm like the Sentinel Comics RPG, I took a lot of time. Like I pulled out all my old comic books from when I was a kid and flipped through them and like listen to some podcasts about comic books and things like that, so my recommendation, not knowing really anything about Eberron, is like dig into that and see what other people have to say who do know it well. And I think that can be a really good thing to just like kind of have that story and that setting kind of in
And my guess is if you're running something steampunk in a place like this, it's probably because you like steampunk. And so you probably already know a lot about that. Trust your instinct on that. Go with the things you love, the things that were exciting to you when you first started reading, watching, being involved with steampunk. Yeah, like I said, immerse yourself in it. And bring up a lot of the, as you're starting out, just bring up all the tropes, that you have seen in steampunk type situations. Yeah. And then, you'll start to eventually kind of find your own niche in those places.
For sure.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much. I'm sorry we didn't get through all the questions. We do have to cut short here a little bit today, but do join us next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about, let me look at the sheet here.
We're going to have a guest. Oh, sorry.
We've got a guest.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Eric Bright will be back on with us. And what are we going to be talking about?
We're going to be talking about the specific game Ironsworn. Eric talked a little bit about that when he came on before, but we're going to do a little deeper dive into Ironsworn, which is a really fun game.
So join us next time as we talk with Eric Bright about the game Ironsworn, and we will get back into that Haversack and finish off more of those questions, all that and more here on Rise of the GM.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all for being here.